I am Rhonda, 32 years old, and I grew up believing wealth was a blessing until it became my prison. My parents controlled every aspect of my life through their checkbook, until one dinner, when my mother snapped, "We are not your bank anymore," her voice sharp with smugness. What they never expected was that 24 hours later, I would be the one deciding their financial fate. The tables had turned completely. If you are watching this, let me know where you are tuning in from in the comments. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who tried to control you with money. Growing up in Beacon Hill, one of Boston's most prestigious neighborhoods, my childhood looked perfect from the outside. Our 5-bedroom colonial revival home, with its meticulously maintained garden, was featured twice in Architectural Digest. My father, Harold, a finance executive, and my mother, Martha, who chaired 3 different charity boards, were fixtures in Boston's social scene. Designer clothes, private schools, summer homes in Nantucket. I had everything money could buy, but very little of what actually mattered. From my earliest memories, money was never just money in our family. It was power, control, and manipulation, wrapped in the guise of parental concern. When I wanted to join the school photography club in 7th grade, my mother smiled that tight smile and said, "Darling, we do not waste time on hobbies that have no future. Your father is paying $20,000 a year for your education." Instead, she enrolled me in debate and French lessons, skills that would actually take you somewhere in life. By 16, I had learned that every gift came with strings. My Sweet 16 present was a BMW convertible, but it was registered in my father's name. "This way, we can take it back if your grades slip," he explained while dangling the keys. I nodded and smiled, already understanding the unspoken contract: obedience for luxury. The only person who seemed to see through this dynamic was my grandfather, William, my father's father. Grandpa William had built the family fortune from modest beginnings, turning a small manufacturing business into a multi-million-dollar corporation. Unlike my parents, he wore simple clothes, drove an older model car, and spoke to everyone, from CEOs to janitors, with the same genuine respect. During my monthly visits to his comfortable but understated home in Cambridge, Grandpa William would ask about my dreams, not my grades or social connections. When I shyly admitted I loved photography, particularly capturing wildlife, he did not dismiss it. Instead, he took me to photography exhibitions and bought me my first real camera for Christmas when I was 17. "Your parents believe money is for showing off," he told me once, while we sat in his study. "But real wealth is having the freedom to choose your own path." Then he showed me his investment portfolio, patiently explaining how compound interest worked, how to read a financial statement, and the difference between assets and liabilities. At the time, I thought he was just being educational, not realizing he was preparing me for something much more significant. When college applications came around, there was never a question of where I would apply. My father was Harvard, my mother was Wellesley, and I would be attending Dartmouth to study business and economics, continuing the family tradition of prestigious education. My application essay was practically written by my mother, who insisted on editing it until my voice was completely erased, replaced by what she called appropriate ambition. I was accepted, of course. My alumni connections, perfect grades achieved through hours of pressured studying, and the substantial donations my parents had made to the school guaranteed that. On the day the acceptance letter arrived, my parents threw a dinner party for 20 of their closest friends, where I was displayed like a prize trophy. "She will graduate and join Harold at the firm," my mother announced, while I stood there smiling so hard my cheeks hurt. Those first 2 years at Dartmouth were a study in quiet desperation. I excelled in my classes, but felt like an imposter in my own life. My roommate, Tara, noticed how I would stare longingly at the art students with their cameras and sketchbooks, lounging on the campus green with a freedom I couldn't imagine. "Why not take an elective in photography?" she suggested. The thought terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. Each time I called home, my father would immediately ask about my business courses, and I would dutifully report my A grades while omitting any mention of my growing depression. At night, I would sometimes take out the camera Grandpa William had given me, now gathering dust in my closet, and scroll through the nature photos I had taken years earlier. In those moments, I felt a flicker of the person I might have been if I had been brave enough to choose my own path. By the end of sophomore year, I was prescribed antidepressant by the campus health center. The psychiatrist gently suggested that perhaps my chosen major was not aligning with my authentic self. I nodded politely and took the prescription, knowing what changing course was not an option. The weight of family expectations and financial dependence was too heavy to challenge. Little did I know that an upcoming summer study abroad program would change everything, setting in motion events that would ultimately force me to choose between financial security and personal freedom, with consequences that would reshape not just my life, but my entire family dynamic. The summer before my junior year, I enrolled in a business internship program that included a 2-week trip to Alaska to study sustainable corporate practices. This was the first time my parents had allowed me to travel so far alone, and only because it was directly related to my business major and would look impressive on my resume. What they didn't know, what I hardly admitted to myself, was how desperately I looked forward to being away from their influence, even briefly. Alaska changed everything. Our group visited a wildlife preserve where a guest photographer was documenting endangered species for National Geographic. His name was Michael Turner, and watching him work was like witnessing someone speak a language I've forgotten I knew. The way he patiently waited for hours to capture a bald eagle in flight, his quiet reverence for the animals, the passion in his voice when he explained how photography could drive conservation efforts. It awakened something that had been sleeping inside me for years. During our free day, Michael noticed me hanging back after his presentation and offered to let me accompany him on a shoot. I spent that day trudging through marshy terrain, my expensive shoes ruined, my heart soaring. When he looked at the few shots I managed to take with my phone, he became very still. "You have an eye, a rare one. The way you capture emotion in these animals. Have you studied photography?" I shook my head, explaining my parents' expectations and my business track. He listened without judgment, then handed me his card. Dart Lake has an excellent visual arts program. Not everyone who takes pictures is a photographer, but I think you are. Don't waste that. I returned to Dartmouth with a secret burning in my chest. For 2 weeks, I researched the photography and journalism program, discovered I could transfer credits, and even met with Professor Diane Foster from the Visual Arts Department, who reviewed my limited portfolio with growing excitement. "These are extraordinary, especially for someone with no formal training," she said, lingering over a photo I had taken of an Arctic fox, its eyes containing a wistfulness that seemed almost human. "You capture something most photographers spend years learning to see." With Professor Foster's encouragement, I drafted a new academic plan and prepared to tell my parents. I chose Thanksgiving break, thinking the holiday spirit might soften the blow. I was wrong. When I mentioned changing my major, my mother's fork clattered against her plate. My father's face turned a shade of red I had never seen before. What followed was 2 hours of escalating anger, disappointment, and finally, threats. "We are paying $50,000 a year for you to become a business professional, not to chase squirrels with a camera," my father said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Photography is a hobby for bored housewives, not a career for our daughter," my mother added, her tone making it clear which was worse in her estimation. When I tried to explain the program's journalism component and potential career paths, my father slammed his hand on the table. "Enough. If you pursue this ridiculous idea, we will cut you off completely. No tuition, no apartment, no car, no allowance. See how well your camera feeds you then." The ultimatum hung in the air between us. I looked at their faces, hardened with certainty that I would back down as I always had, and I did. By the end of the evening, I had apologized for temporary insanity and promised to remain focused on my business degree. I returned to school defeated, but not entirely broken. With Professor Foster's continued support, I secretly enrolled in 2 photography classes, paying with money I earned working part-time at the campus bookstore. I told my parents I had joined a business case competition that required extra hours. Those classes became my sanctuary. For 6 hours each week, I was truly myself, learning about composition, light, and the technical aspects of photography that had always been mysterious to me. My projects consistently received top marks, with Professor Foster pushing me to develop my unique style, capturing the hidden emotional lives of animals and natural spaces. By the end of junior year, I had sold my first photograph to a local nature magazine. The check was small, just $150, but I framed it anyway, hiding it in my closet where my parents would never look. During my weekly calls with Grandpa William, I cautiously shared my secret studies. Instead of disapproval, I found enthusiastic support. "Your grandmother was an artist too, you know," he told me. "She gave it up to be the proper wife my generation expected. It was her greatest regret." He began sending me small amounts of money, ostensibly for books and supplies, but with a wink that told me he knew exactly what supplies I was purchasing. As senior year approached, I lived a double life: the obedient business student my parents funded and expected, and the passionate photographer I was becoming in stolen hours. The strain was enormous. I lost weight, had trouble sleeping, and felt constantly anxious about discovery. Yet, in those moments behind the camera, I experienced a clarity and purpose that made the deception worthwhile. What I did not realize was that time was running out in ways I could not have anticipated, and soon I would be forced to make choices that would determine not just my career, but the fundamental power dynamics that had defined my family for stolid decades. Graduation day arrived with all the pomp and ceremony my parents cherished. They flew in on the family's private jet, bringing along several of their friends to witness what my mother called the culmination of our parenting success. I stood on stage, accepting my business degree with honors, dressed in the conservative Burberry dress my mother had selected, feeling like an actress in someone else's play. Professor Foster sat among the faculty, giving me a small, sad smile that conveyed both congratulations and regret for what might have been. The celebration dinner that evening was at Boston's most exclusive restaurant, where my father ordered $2,000 bottles of champagne and toasted to my bright future in finance. Job offers had already come in from several prestigious firms, all facilitated by my father's connections. I had accepted a position at Wellington Management, which pleased my parents enormously. No one mentioned my photography or asked what I actually wanted. That part of me remained invisible to everyone, except Grandpa William, who had been too ill to attend the graduation. The next morning, while my parents were having brunch with friends, I slipped away to visit Grandpa William at his home. His health had been declining for months, a fact my father acknowledged with business-like detachment, more concerned with estate planning than his father's comfort. When I arrived, I was shocked by how much he had deteriorated since I had last seen him. The robust man, who had taught me to fish and invest, was now frail, his skin almost translucent against the white hospital bed that had been installed in his study. He said, "There she is, my favorite granddaughter." "I am your only granddaughter," he said, our usual greeting, which is why I've never had to lie about you being my favorite. His attempt at a laugh turned into a cough that seemed to rack his entire body. After he caught his breath, he gestured for me to come closer and took my hand. He said, "I am not proud of my son," he said plainly. "Harold has forgotten everything I taught him about what matters in life. He believes bank accounts measure success. I believe happiness does." I tried to defend my father out of habit, but Grandpa William waved it away.
I have made arrangements, Rhonda. When I am gone, you will understand. Just promise me something when the time comes. Be braver than I was. I gave Harold too much without enough guidance. I will not make that mistake with you. I did not fully understand what he meant then, but I promised anyway, tears streaming down my face. He squeezed my hand with surprising strength. Your camera is not just a tool, Rhonda. It is your voice. Do not let them silence it again. 2 weeks after graduation, I started my job at Wellington Management. The office was all gleaming glass and hushed voices with everyone dressed in nearly identical conservative suits. My corner office had a view of the Boston Harbor, a nameplate that included Williams family under my name to remind everyone of my connections, and a starting salary my college friends could only dream about. I was miserable from day one. The work was mind-numbing despite its complexity. I spent my days analyzing market trends, attending client meetings where I spoke little but was paraded as the firm's bright young talent, and trying not to watch the clock. Evenings and weekends, which my colleagues spent networking or preparing for the next week, I spent taking photographs in the Arnold Arboretum or along the Charles River, capturing moments of natural beauty that felt increasingly distant from my daily existence. My parents, meanwhile, had taken my professional employment as permission to increase their control over other aspects of my life. They insisted I purchase a condominium in Beacon Hill rather than the South End apartment I preferred, going so far as to make the down payment themselves so I would not make a poor investment. They vetted the men I dated, inviting potential candidates to dinner and openly assessing their family connections and career prospects. When I showed interest in Jordan, a talented architect with a growing reputation but middle-class roots, my mother took me aside and explained that I needed to marry within or above our station. The unspoken arrangement was clear. In exchange for financial advantages and social privilege, I surrendered my autonomy. Any resistance was met with subtle reminders of all they had provided and continued to provide. The down payment on my condo, the connections that secured my job, the invitations to social events where important people would be present. Each gift was a chain, beautifully wrapped, but binding nonetheless. 6 months into this carefully mapped life, I met Jackson at a charity gala my mother had insisted I attend. Unlike the other men there, who spoke endlessly about their hedge funds or law practices, Jackson talked about his travels as a journalist covering environmental issues around the world. His passion reminded me of Michael.
From Alaska, but with an intensity that was entirely his own. When he asked what I did beyond managing other people's money, I surprised myself by telling him about my photography. Even more surprisingly, he asked to see my work. We slipped away from the gala to a nearby coffee shop, where I nervously showed him my portfolio on my laptop. He studied each image with genuine interest, asking questions about my technique and inspiration. "You should not be wearing that suit," he said finally, gesturing to my designer outfit. "You should be out there showing people what you see through that lens." For the first time, I admitted aloud what I had only thought. I want to be. I just do not know how to break free. Our conversation lasted until the cafe closed. Jackson told me about an upcoming expedition to photograph endangered species in Tanzania. The organization was looking for an additional photographer, someone with a unique perspective. "Your work has that emotional quality they're seeking," he said. "You make people care about these animals." The application deadline was 1 week away. The expedition would last 3 months and require specialized equipment I did not own. The total cost, including the equipment and travel expenses, would be around $15,000. It was a fraction of my annual salary, but my parents monitored my spending closely, having insisted on helping me manage my finances as a new professional. That night, I could not sleep. I paced my perfectly decorated condo that felt nothing like home, thinking about Tanzania, about lions and elephants seen through my lens, about waking up with purpose each day. By morning, I had decided to apply. I worked on my application every night after leaving the office, selecting my strongest wildlife photographs and writing an impassioned statement about why this opportunity aligned with my vision as a photographer. 2 weeks later, I received an email that changed everything. I had been accepted. The expedition director specifically mentioned the emotional depth of my work as the deciding factor. Joy and terror fought for dominance as I realized what this meant. I would need to request a leave of absence from work, stand up to my parents, and find a way to finance the equipment I needed. The first step seemed most manageable, asking my parents a loan to purchase professional-grade camera equipment. I was an adult with a well-paying job. Surely they would see this as a reasonable request. I scheduled dinner at their home, prepared a presentation about the expedition's prestige and the career opportunities it might create, and arrived with uncharacteristic optimism. I had no idea I was walking into the confrontation that would ultimately shatter our family's power structure forever. The evening started pleasantly enough. Our family chef had prepared my father's favorite prime rib, and my mother was in good spirits after receiving an invitation to chair an exclusive charity ball. I waited until dessert, when both were relaxed and satisfied, before introducing my news. I have been selected for prestigious wildlife photography expedition to Tanzania, I began, trying to keep my voice steady. It is an incredible honor. They only choose 5 photographers from hundreds of applicants. My father's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. My mother's smile froze in place. Neither spoke, so I continued, explaining the expedition's conservation focus, the respected wildlife organizations involved, and how this could establish me as a serious photographer while still maintaining my finance career. I would need 3 months away from Wellington, which my manager has tentatively approved as a sabbatical. The only obstacle is equipment. I need to invest in professional-grade cameras and lenses. I pulled out the carefully prepared list with costs. "You cannot be serious," my mother interrupted, her voice soft but dangerous. "This is about that ridiculous photography hobby again. I thought we had moved past this childishness." "It is not a hobby, Mother. It is my passion. And I am good at it. Really good. The selection committee said my work has unusual emotional depth." My father set down his wine glass with deliberate precision. "Rhonda, you have a responsibility to the family name. Taking pretty pictures of animals might amuse you, but it does nothing for the Williams legacy. Your position at Wellington is just the beginning of what we have planned for you." "What you have planned for me," I corrected quietly. "But what about what I plan for myself?" The tension escalated as I explained that I wanted to pursue photography alongside my finance career, not abandon one for the other. I showed them my portfolio on my tablet, pointing out the publications that had already featured my work. They barely glanced at the images, their expressions hardening with each attempt to make them understand. Finally, I arrived at the request I had come to make. I need $15,000 for equipment. It's an investment in my future. I can repay it from my salary over the next year. My mother's laugh was like ice cracking. An investment in what exactly? A safari vacation where you can play National Geographic photographer? This is not playing. This is pursuing something meaningful to me. We did not raise you to chase meaningless dreams. We raised you to build on the foundation we created." "A foundation I never asked for," I replied, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. My mother set down her napkin and fixed me with the cold stare I had feared since childhood. She snapped her words sharp and smugness with just enough steel to sever any hope I had left. "We are not your bank anymore. You have a job. You have a trust fund you can access at 35. If you want to waste money on cameras, use your own. All my life, you have used money to control me. My education, my career, my home. Nothing has ever truly been my choice." "And look how well you have turned out," my father retorted. "Everything you have is because of us." "No," I said, standing up.
Everything I am is despite you. I left that night with their refusal ringing in my ears and a hollow feeling in my chest. Not only had they denied my request for a loan, but they had also threatened to contact Wellington's senior management to block my sabbatical request. As I drove back to my condo, tears blurred my vision, and for the first time, genuine anger replaced the disappointment and resignation I usually felt after these confrontations. The next morning brought news that changed everything. The family lawyer, Sebastian Miller, called to inform me that grandfather William had passed away peacefully in his sleep. The grief hit me like a physical blow. The one person who had truly seen me, who had encouraged my passion and believed in my potential, was gone. The funeral was held 3 days later at the grand church where generations of William's family members had been married and buried. My father delivered a eulogy that spoke of legacy and business acumen, but mentioned little of grandfather William's kindness, humor, or wisdom. Throughout the service, I noticed my parents exchanging whispers, their eyes occasionally drifting to Sebastian Miller, who sat stoically in the front pew. At the reception afterward, while my parents circulated among Boston's elite who had come to pay respects, I sat alone in the garden, remembering quiet afternoons with grandfather William, his patient explanations of how to capture light with a camera, his genuine interest in my hopes and dreams. Sebastian approached me there, his usual formal demeanor softened by genuine sympathy. "Your grandfather spoke of you often, Miss Williams, with great pride." I wiped away tears. "He was the only one who really knew me." Sebastian nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps more than you realize. He asked me to give you this after the funeral." He handed me an envelope with my name written in grandfather William's distinctive handwriting. "Also, there is a meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m. at my office regarding the estate. Your presence is required." I expected the note to contain personal sentiments, a final goodbye. Instead, it held just one line: "Remember your promise to be brave." The next morning I arrived. At Sebastian's office, I found my parents already seated in the conference room, their faces tense with anticipation. My father had been his father's only child and presumed heir. The family company had been sold years ago, but Grandpa William's personal fortune was substantial, conservatively estimated at around $50 million. Sebastian entered precisely at 10 a.m., carrying a leather portfolio. After expressing condolences, he got straight to business. "I will now read the last will and testament of William Charles Williams." What followed was nothing short of revolutionary. Grandpa William had left 10% of his estate to various conservation charities. Another 10% was divided among loyal staff members. The remaining 80%, along with all properties and personal possessions, was placed in a family trust with very specific instructions. "To my granddaughter, Rhonda Elizabeth Williams, I leave the position of sole trustee with full discretionary control over all assets and distributions." My father's face drained of color. My mother's mouth fell open in undisguised shock. Sebastian continued reading the terms, which included monthly allowances for my parents that could be adjusted at my discretion as trustee, provided they met certain behavioral conditions outlined in detailed appendices. "This is outrageous," my father finally spluttered. "I am his son, his only child." "And yet," he replied calmly, "Mr. Williams was of sound mind and body when he revised his will last year. His wishes are legally binding." As the meeting continued, Sebastian explained the intricacies of the trust. I would work closely with the trust manager, Anthony Pearson, who would handle day-to-day operations, but all major decisions required my approval. This included any expenditure requested by my parents beyond their base allowance. My parents left Sebastian's office without speaking to me, their fury palpable in the stiff set of their shoulders. I remained behind, trying to process this seismic shift in our family dynamic. Sebastian offered me tea and a moment to collect my thoughts. He explained, "Your grandfather was concerned about your parents' values and their influence on you. He saw in you a kindness and integrity that he feared they might extinguish given enough time."
But why give me this power? I do not know the first thing about managing this much money. That is what Anthony and I are here for. But the moral decisions, the values that guide the use of this wealth, those he trusted to you alone. I left Sebastian's office with a strange mix of grief, power, and trepidation. On the drive home, my phone buzzed with a text message from Anthony Pearson. Your parents have requested their first monthly allowance early. Amount, $20,000. Reason given, emotional distress. Approve. In that moment, sitting at a red light, the weight of my new responsibility settled on my shoulders. I thought of the dinner 2 nights ago, my mother's smug dismissal, my father's controlling dictates. I thought of years of emotional manipulation disguised as parental concern. I thought of Grandpa William's final note, remember your promise to be brave. I typed one word, denied. The response was immediate and explosive. Within 20 minutes of sending that text, my phone began ringing incessantly. First my father, then mother, then their family attorney. I let each call go to voicemail, needing time to prepare for the confrontation I knew was coming. This was uncharted territory for me, standing my ground against the 2 people who had controlled every aspect of my life since birth. When the doorbell rang an hour later, I took a deep breath before answering. Both parents stood in the hallway, their faces contorted with a rage I had never seen directed at me before. How dare you? My father hissed as they pushed past me into the living room. We raised you, we gave you everything, and this is how you repay us? I motioned them to sit, but they remained standing, too agitated to observe normal social protocols. For the first time in my life, I saw fear beneath their anger. They were suddenly dependent on me, and the role reversal had shaken them to their core. $20,000 is excessive, I said, keeping my voice level, especially given our conversation the other night when you made it clear you are not my bank. It seems the situation has reversed. This is different, my father argued. That was your frivolous photography nonsense. This is about our lifestyle, our standing in the community. A lifestyle beyond your means, apparently, I replied. Sebastian showed me the financial records. You have been spending more than Dad earns for years. The vacation home in Aspen, the yacht, the private jet memberships, all financed by regular loans from Grandpa William that you never repaid. Their expressions confirmed what Sebastian had revealed during our meeting. My parents had been living a lifestyle that projected immense wealth, while secretly relying on Grandpa William's generosity to maintain it. With his death, they had assumed his fortune would directly pass to my father, resolving their financial overextension. Instead, they found themselves dependent on the daughter they had dismissed. We had an understanding with my father said stiffly. He knew those loans were essentially advances on my inheritance. That is not what his records indicate, and clearly not what he intended with his will. My mother changed tactics, her anger giving way to a calculated vulnerability I had seen her deploy countless times at charity functions. Darling, we are still adjusting to the loss. Your grandfather would want us to be comfortable during this difficult time. Grandfather wanted many things, I agreed. He wanted me to pursue photography. He wanted our family to value more than money and status. He wanted me to be brave enough to break the cycle of financial control. You cannot possibly understand what is involved in maintaining our position in society, my father dismissively said. Perhaps not, but I understand what it feels like to have my dreams dismissed as frivolous while watching you spend thousands on wine and golf memberships. The conversation circled for another hour, their demands gradually transforming into negotiations, then pleas, and finally, thinly veiled threats. We will contest the will, my father declared. No judge will uphold this manipulation from beyond the grave. Sebastian had prepared me for this possibility. The will includes a no contest clause, I reminded them. If you challenge it and lose, you forfeit everything. Given Grandpa William's meticulous documentation of his concerns about your financial judgment, your chances are not good. As they finally left, defeated but far from accepting, my mother paused at the door. "You will regret this, Rhonda. Family should come first." "I agree," I said quietly. "That is why I cannot enable behaviors that have torn this family apart." After they left, I called Anthony and arranged a reasonable monthly allowance for my parents, enough to live comfortably but not extravagantly, with the first payment to begin the following month. Then I contacted Sebastian and set up a meeting to discuss my next steps. 2 days later, sitting in Sebastian's office with Anthony, I laid out my plan. First, I would take the sabbatical from Wellington for the Tanzania expedition, investing in the camera equipment I needed from my own new funds. Second, I would establish clear boundaries with my parents, maintaining our relationship but ending the cycle of financial manipulation. Third, I would explore how the trust could support wildlife conservation efforts, honoring Grandpa William's values. Sebastian nodded approvingly. "Your grandfather would be pleased. He was especially concerned that you find your own path, not the one your parents prescribed." I was surprised by what he did. Giving me this much control seemed extreme. Anthony opened a folder and slid a document across the desk. "This might help you understand. It's a letter your grandfather wrote to your father 5 years ago, expressing concerns about financial decisions and—"
The response was attached. The letter was thoughtful and loving, yet firm, outlining Grandpa William's concern that my father had become too focused on appearances and status at the expense of substance and character. My father's reply was dismissive and defensive, suggesting that Grandpa William was out of touch with the realities of modern society. "There were many such exchanges," Sebastian explained. "Your grandfather tried for years to guide your father toward a healthier relationship with wealth. When he saw those same patterns being forced upon you, he felt compelled to intervene." As I left the meeting, I felt a new resolve strengthening within me. This was not about punishing my parents, but about breaking a generational pattern of toxic wealth. Grandpa William had given me not just financial power, but the opportunity to redefine what our family valued. That afternoon, I submitted my formal request for a 3-month sabbatical from Wellington, applied for an expedited passport, and ordered the camera equipment I had so carefully researched over the past year. Each action felt like a declaration of independence, a step toward becoming the person I had always wanted to be, but never had the courage to pursue. In the weeks that followed, my parents made several attempts to regain control. They sent family friends to reason with me. They tried to appeal to Wellington's board to block my sabbatical. They even attempted to contact Anthony directly in an effort to circumvent my authority. Each effort failed, met with the quiet but firm boundaries I was learning to establish. The night before my departure for Tanzania, I received a final text from my trust manager. "Your parents have requested an additional $15,000 for a last-minute trip to Europe to recover from their emotional distress. Approve." Looking at my packed bags, the new camera equipment I had purchased myself, and the itinerary for an expedition that represented my first truly independent choice, I felt an unexpected calm. I typed "denied" without hesitation, then added a personal note. "I am leaving for Tanzania tomorrow. I hope when I return we can begin building a healthier relationship based on respect rather than financial dependence." As my plane took off the next morning, I watched Boston disappear beneath the clouds and felt the weight of 32 years of expectations lift from my shoulders. For the first time in my life, I was flying toward something I had chosen entirely for myself. Tanzania was everything I had hoped for and more. The expedition team consisted of 5 photographers, 3 wildlife biologists, and local guides who knew the terrain intimately. We spent days tracking endangered black rhinos across the Serengeti, documenting their behaviors and the environmental threats they faced. I woke before dawn each morning, camera ready, my heart pounding with purpose and passion rather than anxiety. My fellow photographers, all established professionals, initially regarded me with curiosity tinged with skepticism. The finance executive turned wildlife photographer was an unusual narrative, but as we worked side by side, my unique perspective began to earn their respect.
While they focused on technical perfection, I sought emotional connection, waiting patiently for moments when the animals revealed something almost human in their expressions. "You have a gift for capturing soul," Eliza told me after reviewing my shots of a mother elephant guarding her calf. "Most photographers take years to develop that sensitivity." Away from Boston's social pressures and my parents' expectations, I found myself transforming in ways that went beyond my photographic skills. I became more confident in voicing my opinions during group discussions. I learned to trust my instincts about lighting and composition rather than second-guessing every decision. I discovered a resilience I never knew I possessed, hiking miles with heavy equipment and enduring tropical downpours and blazing heat without complaint. Each week, I sent selected photographs to Sebastian, who had offered to manage communication with my parents while I was away. Their initial response was cold silence, but by the end of the first month, Sebastian reported a subtle shift. My mother had asked to see more of my work. My father had inquired about my well-being during the rainy season. Midway through the expedition, Jackson joined us for 2 weeks covering the conservation efforts for an environmental magazine. Seeing him again in this context, where I was fully myself rather than the version my parents had crafted, sparked a connection that felt unlike any relationship I had previously experienced. He saw me, the real me, and valued me without reference to my family name or financial status. "You look different," he observed as we tracked a pride of lions at sunset. "More alive." "I feel different," I admitted, "like I am finally the person I was meant to be." On my last night in Tanzania, our team celebrated the successful completion of the expedition with a dinner under the stars. Eliza announced that National Geographic had expressed interest in featuring a series of my photographs in their next issue, focusing on the emotional lives of endangered species. The team toasted my success, and for once I accepted their praise without deflection or discomfort. That night, lying in my tent and listening to the distant sounds of wildlife, I composed an email to Wellington management, respectfully resigning from my position. It was time to commit fully to the path I had discovered, to honor my gift rather than bury it beneath expectations that had never been my own. I returned to Boston 3 months later as a different person, confident, purposeful, and clear about my boundaries. The first meeting with my parents was tense, but it lacked the explosive confrontation I had feared. They sat stiffly in my condo, examining the photographs displayed on the walls with expressions that mixed reluctant admiration with lingering resentment. "National Geographic," my mother said at last, finally touching the magazine that featured my work. "I suppose that is quite prestigious." "It is," I agreed, neither seeking nor requiring her approval, but acknowledging this small olive branch. "The conservation organization has asked me to continue documenting endangered species around the world." My father frowned. "And how exactly will you support yourself? Photography is hardly a stable career." I explained the financial arrangements I had made with Sebastian and Anthony's help. A portion of the trust would provide me with a modest but comfortable income while I established my photography career. I had already received commissions from 3 major conservation organizations and was planning exhibitions in New York and London. "As for your monthly allowance," I continued, addressing the unspoken tension, "it remains as previously established, reasonable, not excessive. If you wish to maintain your current lifestyle, Dad will need to continue working rather than taking early retirement as you had planned." They bristled at this reality check, but did not argue. The power dynamic had fundamentally shifted, and we all knew it. Before they left, I handed them an invitation to my first gallery opening in Boston the next month. "I would like you to be there," I said sincerely, "not as financial backers or to make connections, but simply as my parents, to see what I have created." The weeks that followed were filled with purpose as I established my new life. I rented a studio space in an artistic neighborhood far from Beacon Hill's manicured perfection. I hired an assistant to help manage the growing interest in my work. I began dating Jackson and Ernest, a relationship developing without my parents' interference or judgment. My first gallery opening exceeded all expectations. The space was filled with conservation advocates, art collectors, and media representatives. My parents arrived exactly on time, impeccably dressed, but clearly uncomfortable in this unfamiliar world. They stood before my photographs, particularly a striking image of an aging male lion gazing directly into the camera. with profound dignity, and I saw something shift in their expressions. "I never understood," my mother said quietly as she studied the image, "why this matters so much to you. Because it is truth. Not the surface we present to the world, but what lies beneath. That is what I try to capture." By the end of the evening, 3/4 of my photographs had sold, with a percentage of proceeds dedicated to wildlife conservation. My father watched as collectors eagerly discussed my technique and vision. And for the first time, I glimpsed uncertainty in his eyes. The dawning realization that his definition of success might have been more limited than he had believed. As months passed, our family dynamic continued to evolve. My parents gradually adapted to their new financial reality, downsizing from their Beacon Hill mansion to a still lovely but less ostentatious townhouse. My father, rather than retiring, found renewed purpose in mentoring young financial professionals, discovering a talent for teaching he had never explored. My mother resigned from several status-driven charity boards and focused on one cause she genuinely cared about: arts education for underprivileged children. Our relationship remained complex and sometimes difficult, but the toxic financial manipulation that had defined it for decades was gone. Without money as a weapon, we were slowly learning to connect as individuals, discovering aspects of each other we had never been allowed to see. A year after Grandpa Williams' death, I established the William Charles Williams Conservation Photography Fellowship, providing funding and mentorship for emerging photographers focused on environmental issues. It felt like the perfect way to honor his legacy, not through wealth accumulation or social status, but by creating opportunities for others to pursue their passion and purpose. The last photograph I took in Tanzania, which hung in my studio as a constant reminder, showed a young lioness standing at the edge of a vast plain, beezing toward the horizon with clear-eyed determination. Every time I looked at it, I saw myself in her, finally free to choose my own path, strong enough to face whatever came next. 2 years after that fateful dinner, when my mother had smugly declared they were not my bank anymore, my life had transformed in ways I could never have imagined. My wildlife photography career had flourished beyond my wildest hopes, with 3 international exhibitions, a book deal, and regular assignments from prestigious conservation organizations. Most importantly, I had found a purpose that woke me each morning with excitement rather than dread. The journey to this point had not been easy. Learning to stand in my power, to make decisions based on my own values rather than fear of disapproval, required constant vigilance against old patterns. There were still days when I questioned myself, when the critical voices I had internalized from my parents whispered that I was being foolish or selfish. But those voices grew fainter with each success, with each moment of authentic joy. My relationship with my parents evolved slowly, with painful setbacks and cautious progress. The first year was the hardest as they adjusted to the new financial reality and the loss of control they had always exercised. There were angry phone calls, guilt-laden emails, and several holidays where tension made every interaction feel like navigating a minefield. The turning point came unexpectedly during a dinner at their new townhouse 18 months after Grandpa Williams' death. My father, who had been uncharacteristically quiet throughout the meal, finally spoke as my mother served coffee. I received a letter from a young analyst I've been mentoring. He wrote to thank me for helping him understand a complex market analysis, but then he said something that struck me. He said, I was the first senior executive who had ever taken time to explain rather than simply demand. My father looked up, vulnerability in his expression I had rarely seen. It made me think about how I raised you, always demanding, never explaining, always judging, never simply seeing. Harold, my mother began, her tone warning. "No, Martha, I need to say this." He turned back to me. I was raised to believe that success had a very specific definition. When you chose a different path, I saw it as a rejection of everything I valued. But watching you these past months, seeing what you have built entirely on your own, I was wrong. And I am sorry. The simple apology, so long awaited, brought tears to my eyes. It was not a complete transformation. My father still occasionally made cutting remarks about the financial stability of artistic careers, and my mother still winced when friends asked about my unusual profession. But it was a beginning, an acknowledgement that perhaps their way was not the only way. My own healing journey had been equally complex. With Sebastian's encouragement, I had started therapy 6 months after returning from Tanzania. Working through the deep-seated insecurities and people-pleasing tendencies that years of conditional love had instilled, I learned to recognize when I was making choices to earn approval rather than because they aligned with my values. I practiced setting boundaries without guilt and expressing my needs without fear. The trust Grandpa William had established became a tool for growth rather than control. Working with Anthony, I structured the family finances to provide stability while encouraging independence. My parents received their monthly allowance without having to request it, removing the power dynamic of approval or denial. In return, they agreed to financial counseling to develop healthier habits. For myself, I established a clear separation between personal and trust assets, living primarily on my photography earnings while using trust funds for specific projects, like the fellowship program and conservation initiatives. This boundary was important to me. I needed to know I could support myself through my own work, that I was not simply replacing one form of financial dependency with another. Jackson became an important part of my new life. His straightforward approach to both relationships and finances was a refreshing change from the complex dynamics I had grown up with. When he moved in with me after a year of dating, we split expenses proportionally to our incomes, had open conversations about money without power plays or hidden agendas, and made decisions as true partners. On the second anniversary of Grandpa William's death, I invited my parents to dinner at my home. Not the condo they had chosen, which I had sold, but a charming Victorian in Cambridge that I had purchased and renovated to include a bright, spacious home studio. The location was deliberate, just 3 blocks from where Grandpa William had lived, in a neighborhood that valued history and character over status. As we sat in my dining room, surrounded by photographs from my travels and artifacts collected from around the world, the contrast with our formal family dinners of the past was striking. The conversation flowed more naturally, with fewer landmines to navigate. My father asked genuine questions about my latest project, documenting climate change impacts on coastal communities. My mother admired a series of portraits I had taken of indigenous conservation leaders, noting the dignity I had captured in their expressions. After dinner, I brought out a special bottle of wine and 3 letters Grandpa William had written before his death, one for each of us, to be opened on this anniversary. We read them silently, each absorbing his final words of wisdom. My letter reminded me that true wealth was not measured in dollars, but in purpose, connection, and courage. You have these in abundance, Rhonda. Use them wisely, not just for yourself, but for others who need to see that different paths are possible. My father did not share the contents of his letter, but I saw him wipe away tears before carefully folding it and placing it in his pocket. My mother's hands trembled as she read hers, and when she finished, she looked at me with new understanding. "He was very proud of you," she said softly, "not just of what you might accomplish, but of who you are. I see now what he saw." Later, as they prepared to leave, my father paused before an enlarged photograph I had taken in Tanzania, the young lioness gazing toward the horizon.
"This one is special to you," he observed, not a question, but a recognition. "She reminds me to keep moving forward, to not be defined by the past." He nodded thoughtfully. "Your work is remarkable, Rhonda. Truly. I may not have understood your choice, but I cannot deny your talent." Coming from him, this simple acknowledgement meant more than all the accolades from critics and collectors. Not because I still sought his approval, but because it represented growth, his and mine. As I closed the door behind them, I felt a sense of peace that had once seemed impossible. The journey from financial control to genuine independence had been difficult and painful, but necessary. I had learned that money could be either a prison or a tool, depending on how we related to it, that wealth without purpose was ultimately empty, that standing in your truth might cost relationships, but living a lie will always cost your soul. Most importantly, I had discovered that breaking cycles of toxic financial dependency requires more than just financial freedom. It demands emotional liberation as well. The ability to define success on your own terms, the courage to disappoint those who would limit you, and the wisdom to use resources as bridges rather than weapons. Have you ever had to stand up to family who tried to control you, financially or otherwise? What helped you find the strength to break free? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to find their own courage. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more stories about finding authenticity in challenging circumstances. And if you know someone struggling with family financial control, share this video as a reminder that they are not alone. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, your path belongs to you alone.